Good morning, everybody. It is Dr. Murphy with Murphy Medical Associates. Let me take the old earpiece out, right? It's Dr. Murphy, Murphy Medical Associates, and our team at coronatestct.com. That's coronatestct.com. Today's date is April 9th, 2021. Today, I'm going to talk about what it's going to take to open up back to normal society. It's not just going to be about vaccines, because we're going to have breakthroughs from vaccines. We have all these variants now that are going to increase our risk of still getting sick. So what do we need to open up? Medicines. That's right. Today, on Murphy's Medical Minute, Molnupiravir. Is it Merck magic or is it Merck madness? All right, guys, all right, let's get this party started. Let's get on with the show. Oh, mon ami, I am always ready for the show. Today, April 9th, 2021, Murphy's Medical Minute is proud to present to you COVID-19 and Merck. Magic, Molnupiravir, or madness? Well, it's a little bit of all three. So let's start. This broadcast today, this live stream, is really for patients with SARS-CoV-2, otherwise known as COVID-19. It is going to be very important, and we are going to need to have effective treatments for SARS-CoV-2. And I think one of the reasons why things have been so crazy with this global pandemic is that our current treatments for inpatient and outpatient reflect our poor understanding of this disease. Why is it our poor understanding of this disease? Well, it's just a baby. This disease has only been a year old. We have only been able to study what's going on in humans as the humans interact with the SARS-CoV-2 virus for a year. That's right. So how do you design medicines and treatments for a year out? Well, you do it at warp speed. That's right. And so Merck has gotten rid of their own vaccine creation and doubled down on medicines. That's right, Merck is headed for medicine land. They work with Ridgeback Therapeutics on this medication called Molopirovir that we are going to review today. We're going to look at the risks, we're going to look at the benefits, and like everything else that we do in medicine, we're going to do a risk-benefit calculation with the limited data that we have. Lastly, upon multiple comments throughout the YouTube channel, multiple comments on my Twitter handle, that's TakeWeightOffMD, or on the Murphy Medical Minute Twitter handle, people have been asking for the ppm chart for carbon dioxide. That's right, so we'll go over that today. But what we need right now is we need outpatient treatments that are not going to require IVs. Listen, I know a ton about this with my business, Hydrate MD. We go and do IVs in the homes of everyone. We tried to get the IV monoclonals to be able to put them into homes. We got stiff-armed by the pharmaceutical companies. Well, guess what? Oral medications are going to be the key to conquering COVID-19. Why? Well, put simply, if you want to go through a vaccine versus medicine debate, there really is no debate. We need both. Vaccines are not our ticket to opening everything up. I will repeat it again. Vaccines are not our ticket to opening everything up. Why? Vaccines are not 100% effective at protecting against infections. That's number one. Vaccines are not 100% effective at preventing transmission. That's number two. Vaccines are not 100% effective at preventing death and severe disease. There, I said it. Anyone who thinks in the real world that these vaccines will keep you 100% safe from death from SARS-CoV-2 are fools. Anyone that thinks that vaccines will prevent 100% of hospitalizations with a SARS-CoV-2 infection are fools. Are fools. And that's part of the reason that vaccine hesitancy is here. People recognize the limitations of the data, right? Mark Twain, lies, damn lies, and statistics. When you're in the real world, flying through light speed ain't like dusting crops. They ain't like dusting crops, boy. You make that jump to light speed, there's a lot of things that could go in the way. A lot of things, a lot of bumps, a lot of bruises out there. We need to look through that. We need to understand that flying really fast is going to give us a lot of mistakes. And those mistakes are going to be magnified. That's right. Those mistakes will be magnified. One of the biggest mistakes I think we had in all of this in the beginning of the pandemic was some belief that hospitals are going to save us. Wrong. Hospital capacity is not everyone. You can't treat all people in a hospital. You can't get all your IV monoclonals and now polyclonals in a hospital. We need to have oral treatments. People are going to get sick and die. It happens with the flu, and we tolerate it. We tolerate it at some level. Why? Because we have an oral medication to help us. Maybe. I can tell you right now, whether it's Zofluza or Tamiflu or whatever we have, the data on these medications are like, okay, I guess. They don't reduce mortality. It hasn't been studied. So here we go. Molnupiravir. Will it tame COVID-19? Hopefully, because we're not going to be able to eliminate it. So I want to go through a little bit with you right here. I want you to take a look up ahead of you, right? Take a look up ahead of you or over here on the slide, whichever picture of the Murph you're looking at. So this is our COVID-19 disease course. And really, I like to break COVID-19 down into 3 stages. There have been multiple publications on the stages of COVID-19. And when we look at the disease course, we then look at the medications that we have available based on the days of the disease and the severity of the disease. Now, I want to remind all of you the following. It's very, very, very important. Super duper important. Not everyone is going to follow the schedule. That is because not everyone is genetically the same. Not everyone is the same weight. Not everyone has the same hormone makeup. Not everyone has the same predisposition with major histocompatibility complexes. Not everyone has the same immune system. So therefore, from day 0 to day 20, it's a wide variation on different people at different times. And that's why you need doctors, clinicians, physicians, and their team. Physicians and their team to be able to treat patients, because you have to be able to identify which person is at which stage. You can't do it, and you can see it here. You have to do it with blood work. You have to do it with a physical examination. You have to do it with ultrasounds, x-rays, echocardiograms, CT scans. You have to do all of these things in different stages, and they cannot all be done at the hospital. When we have outpatient practices that are refusing to care for COVID patients, then they push them to the hospital. But that leaves a whole lot of people untreated or undertreated for this disease. Medicines play a role. Laboratories guide that treatment. I'll say it again. Laboratories guide that treatment. You know, when we started testing and doing laboratories for patients, all sorts of people went crazy. All sorts of people went crazy. Hospital-based physicians said, "What are you doing all these labs?" Well, because we're trying to figure out what's going on. State Attorney General's office, Assistant Attorney General in the state of Connecticut, calls and says, "Why are you doing all these labs?" And I go, I'm sorry, Doctor, what's your name again? Yeah, right? Even doctors were confused. Why are you doing these labs? We have to find out on this stage where people are at, because not everyone is going to follow a day 0 to day 20 course. That's just not going to happen. There's a genetic predisposition, and we have to identify those things. Akiko Iwasaki's team up at Yale were identifying immunologic autoantibodies that were playing a role here, and I think that's very important. It's when we think about COVID-19, we have to think about this disease as the bugger, SARS-CoV-2, and the host. And there's a gene-gene interaction between the RNA genome of the bugger, the proteome, the proteins of the bugger, and the genes, the genome of the host, and the proteome of the host, and the interaction between the two of them. We're now finding some amazing things about SARS-CoV-2, including mutational analysis revealing that it's doing stuff like the HIV virus. It has selectional pressures where it is mutating to avoid T-cell response, avoiding T-cell response. I think that's absolutely amazing that a little virus can do all of that stuff. The question is, we don't have enough time as humans to evolve our immune response in their case, right? We are not replicating to the level that a virus is. Listen, yeah, I know all about Irish twins, but humans cannot replicate fast enough to evolve. Our epigenetic modification cannot evolve fast enough for this virus. Therefore, we need vaccines and we need medicines. We need both. We need diagnostics, we need labs, we need ultrasounds, we need echocardiograms, we need CT scans. This is medical care. It's not pull up a mobile van and swab everyone that wants to go to a Yankee game. When you have SARS-CoV-2, you need medical care on the outpatient setting. And as a reminder, 70-80% of people with SARS-CoV-2 infections never go to the hospital, maybe 80%, in some cases 90%. That doesn't mean they won't get long COVID. That doesn't mean they won't get side effects. It doesn't mean they won't get disabled. It doesn't mean they won't end up in the hospital. And so our goal is to prevent hospitalizations and death. It's number one. Goal number two is to prevent long COVID. I don't know how to prevent long COVID. Goal number three is to treat the patients who have the diseases, treat their symptoms, and palliate their care. So now we've developed a whole lot of different medications at light speed, which means there's going to be a lot of mistakes along the way. So on day 2, we see positive PCRs. I've seen them much earlier than that. And with B.1.127, we see that you can pop a positive earlier than that. With P1, you can pop a positive earlier than that. There's data out there that shows that. On day 7 as a hospital admission, I disagree with you. In fact, I think a lot of times you don't get till day 14 till you end up in the hospital. The make or break days for COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 infection are simple. Day 6 to day 13. Those are the days in the windows where if it's gonna go south, it's gonna go south. How do I know? I've taken care of thousands of patients with SARS-CoV-2. Thousands. Our practice, thousands of positives we've cared for. Day 10 is ARDS. I disagree with you. It's usually day 13 or 14. People get into ARDS and they end up on mechanical ventilation. ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome. It's a condition where a proteinaceous material lines our lungs, preventing us from exchanging oxygen. And I'm here to tell you right now, still to this day, if you go on the ventilator, you at minimum have a 30% risk of death. Minimum. So we got to keep people off the ventilator. How do we do that? We do that through medications. In this case, dexamethasone. Dexamethasone has been shown week 2, after week 2, or if you need oxygen, that's the time to use your steroids, after week 2. You don't use them in week 1. You don't give people a Z-pack, right? This is crazy town. We'll talk about other strategies here right now, but going to an urgent care and getting a Z-pack and steroids in week 1 is probably one of the worst things you can do for this virus. And there's a difference here, and I'm not going to go into attacking all my other colleagues, but there is a difference between the training of physicians, PAs, and nurse practitioners. And if you have a PA running an urgent care center or a physician assistant, or a nurse practitioner running an urgent care center, they didn't get the training that physicians did. They didn't get the training. I'm not saying that you should demand a physician for your care at all times, but with COVID-19, it's really helpful to have a physician in the driver's seat, especially an educated physician. That being said, my PAs and NPs probably know more about this virus than a lot of physicians out there. Why? Because I test them, because I train them, and that's just the way it is. Not all physician assistants or NPs have the same training. Very important to remember that. And not all physicians had the same training. That's why we have a lot of different specialties. So when you look at the medications that we use, we do a lot of different stuff. Some of it's evidence-based as best we can. Some of it is no risk, possible benefit. You always want to stay out of the high risk, no benefit category. You don't want to touch that. So in stage 1 early infection, we have seen people use remdesivir. On an outpatient setting, there's no indication for it. On an outpatient setting, there's really no indication for convalescent plasma as well. The data on convalescent plasma is garbage. It is not good. On early outpatient data, we've seen really good data with monoclonal antibodies. We've also seen good data on polyclonal antibodies. Polyclonal antibodies like the Regeneron CoV2 combination of antibodies. This combination of antibodies is useful because it prevents virus escape. In early disease, we've seen some of that viral escape. We've seen some of it. And so in the New York City tri-state area, we should be using polyclonal antibodies. Bam Bam is not for our area right now because I'm worried about escape. Bam Bam for B.1.127, that's a very reasonable thing to do. Places where B.1.127 is through the roof, like Michigan, or like Florida, Bam Bam probably could be used. It's once you get the escape from variants like B.1.526, P1, or B.1.351 that you should be using polyclonal antibodies. Next, dexamethasone, week 2. I'll repeat it again, dexamethasone, week 2. Week 2, and I think that using dexamethasone for people who have oxygen need is brilliant. It's what we have to do. Now, in the host inflammatory response phase where your body is burning up, anticoagulation, Lovenox. If you're in the hospital, you should be using Lovenox. But if you're grossly ill, there's actually been a study that showed that using full dose anticoagulation in the ICU is a fool's errand. It actually doesn't lead to a better outcome. It doesn't lead to a better outcome. So what I've told you so far is required injections, and IVs. Injections and IVs. That's right, inpatient medication. Inpatient medication and some outpatient medication. The polyclonal, monoclonal antibodies have been used in hospitals. I've seen them, even though they are not indicated or approved for the hospital. Even though they're not approved or indicated for the hospital. I've seen them used in the hospital. Remdesivir, people throw that on all the time. At first, the remdesivir data looked crappy, and then it looked a little bit better. And so when we have limited options, we use what we can. The only thing that is really great here, really life-saving medication, is dexamethasone. That's a dirt cheap steroid. Dirt cheap steroid. No one's going to get rich giving dexamethasone. I hate to say it, but there are perverse incentives here. As hospitals are struggling, they need the extra money required for the COVID-19 patient. And so there's been a differential in pay of about $30,000 for every hospitalized patient. For every hospitalized patient. Tocilizumab is used when your body is burning up and when people are rapidly declining. You can't use it if there's a risk of GI perforation or bleed. Tocilizumab is an IL-6. Remember, IL-6 is one of the interleukins that our medical practice at Murphy Medical Associates and our team at coronatestct.com test for. We test for an IL-6 to IL-10 ratio. Why? Because we can assess how bad the patient is going to do, right? These tumor necrosis factors, tumor markers, these things matter in blood work. They matter in blood work. We also, and I'll tell you about our outpatient management in a little bit, therapeutic anticoagulation is not indicated in the severest people in the ICU because they don't have good outcomes. They don't have good outcomes. Full dose anticoagulation in an ICU patient, not good outcomes. You want to use that medication when the patient is first in the hospital and has an elevated D dimer. Yet another outpatient laboratory that should be done. With the outpatient medications, I'll tell you again, dexamethasone is really should not be used in the first 2 weeks of disease unless you need oxygen. As an outpatient, I wouldn't prescribe dexamethasone as a steroid or a steroid equivalent. Early in the course of this disease, you may actually do more harm than good. So going to an urgent care center and getting a Medrol dose pack and a Z pack for COVID-19, you better pack your bags because you're headed to the hospital. That's right. Z pack and Medrol dose pack have no indications with COVID-19. Zero indications with COVID-19. None. Instead, in the tri-state area, we should be looking at the Regeneron CoV-2 polyclonal antibody treatment. Bamilivimab is also a good medication for outpatients. Personally, I know. It took me, and I'll tell you right now, it took me 2.5 days to arrange for my parents and multiple phone calls to get monoclonal antibodies. It took a bunch of days. They were in Florida, outside of Tampa, and we had to get them because they were positive. Why were my folks positive? Well, you know, that's HIPAA. They did authorize me to let you know that my folks were positive for SARS-CoV-2. We gave them monoclonal antibodies and they ended up doing great. In addition to that, when people have elevated D-dimers, we use aspirin. When their D-dimers are very elevated, 2.5 or above, we use Lovenox, therapeutic Lovenox for patients. And I'll tell you right now, in the first wave, we had 0 mortality with that strategy. 0 mortality, 0 GI bleeds. We followed these patients regularly. They did great. We also used hydroxychloroquine in the very beginning until the data didn't come out, and the risk-benefit ratio was suboptimal. Instead, in certain situations, ivermectin, zinc, and vitamin D3 are used. There's a whole coalition of physicians called the Frontline Critical Care Coalition that uses a protocol called iMask, which includes zinc, vitamin D3, quercetin, melatonin, aspirin, vitamin C, and ivermectin. And they continue to publish data. The data is not randomized double-blind controlled trials, but we need to remember that meta-analyses are not randomized double-blinded controlled trials. They are meta-analyses, which means we take all of the data together from different studies. So like traveling through light speed, it's not like dusting crops, and a lot of errors can come up with interpretation. So the limited evidence on outpatient medicines has really spurred physicians to take matters into their own hands. I know lots of outpatient physicians that are trying their best because all they want to do is care for their patients the best they can. The best they can. Enter doctors. Woo! What's up, Ozzie? How are you doing? You know, whenever I hear the name Oz, I think of Ozymandias. Ozymandian? Yeah, with the Watchmen. On the regular, dropping squids on people. So that way the globe is united against the alien threat. Yeah, we've seen a lot of division here on the globe. There's no doubt about that. So here's a big question. Big question. Will Merck medicine MK4482 work? Well, listen, you need to remember that a university spun off this nucleoside analog first. Then Ridgeback Bio acquired it. Then in July of last year, Merck partnered with Ridgeback to design some trials to find out whether this works or not. Now, Molnupiravir is a nucleoside analog. What? Okay, all right. Put simply, and I'm going to steal this from Dr. Bean, even though I'm going to tell Dr. Bean I used this analogy before I heard you use it. We teach medical students about nucleoside and nucleoside analogs, and we use the BRIC model. So, Dr. Bean, I'm not stealing it from you. We all use this model. So basically what these medications do is they are like a faulty brick or a faulty beam or a faulty stone in a stone wall. When the virus is making its proteins, it makes amino acids. The amino acids come together based on the nucleoside type that we have. So when we're replicating a virus, we have to replicate our RNA. And we replicate our RNA to create messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is the RNA that tells us what amino acids to put together. And the amino acids put together in a line create a protein. Amino acids put together create a protein. How this happens? Simple. The RNA lines up with a ribosome, right? The virus uses the human machinery, and a ribosome lines up, that's one of our proteins, that lines up onto the RNA. These ribosomes pull in a tRNA, right, a transfer RNA. That RNA brings with it an amino acid. Right? That RNA brings with it an amino acid. So when we are making more RNA in this chain, we use these nucleoside bricks. We use these bricks to make a brick wall, or stones to make a stone wall, however you want to do it. However you want to do it. Or in this case, setting up a set of dominoes, where we put in a fake domino that won't fall. When you do domino rally and you push the dominoes, and they go through, the dominoes have to fall. If they don't fall, then you don't spread or propagate the wave. And so there are a lot of nucleoside analogs out there. We use them for HIV, we use them for hepatitis, and these nucleoside analogs are what we call a chain terminator. That means they stop the domino rally. They stop it from going further. Well, in this case, what happens is not chain termination. Instead, it tricks the virus into producing a faulty code. And that faulty code leads into twisted proteins. It makes the proteins not work at all. So it reduces viral efficacy. It makes viruses that are non-functional viruses. And by making non-functional viruses, you still have a lot of virus there. It's just junky virus. It's not working very well. It can't replicate, and often it can't go on and infect other cells. So you're basically building an attenuated virus that the body is probably going to have an immune reaction to. So, with Dr. Oz on the line, you have to ask yourself, there's a whole lot of hype for this repurposed chemicals. So when Dr. Oz is involved, I always have to ask myself, is it true science or is it press and publicists? Well, let's take a look. We go to Clinicaltrialsgov to review what's going on. The first of these studies, and I think this is why the press hullabaloo was out. Back in February of this year, the safety trial, the 2A trial for Merck Medicine MK4482, otherwise known as Molnupiravir. And remember, Molopirovir is a prodrug. It has to be metabolized and turned into this chemical EIDD 2801. 2801. That's the active compound. So the question is it safe? Is it safe? I don't know. They closed the trial. We're waiting for data. They closed the trial. We're waiting for data. On Clinicaltrials.gov, you cannot see the data. We know that the trial is completed. We know that February was when they closed the trial. Usually it takes a month to chew through that data to issue a statement. Well, guess what? In early March, Ridgeback and Merck issued a little statement. It wasn't anything other than to say that the trial was closed and it wasn't terminated early. So all the press jumped on it. Hey, it's a magic med. All the business entities jumped on it. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Dr. Oz. Everyone jumped on this to say, oh, it's a magic medication. Oh my God, it's going to be amazing. Not so fast, my friend. Not so fast. The safety study was of 204 participants in a randomized double-blinded controlled trial for safety. They excluded hospitalized patients. The safety trial excluded hospitalized patients. Next, we've got 3 more shots on goal with Molnupiravir. The second study is for hospitalized patients. Efficacy and safety of Molnupiravir MK4482 in hospitalized adult patients. Adult patients, not children. Read it again, not children. The primary endpoints are survival. Yeah, that'd be a good endpoint, right? Did you live? You know, it's kind of funny. Someone, not someone, an ER doctor I know on Twitter actually said, press Ganies for emergency room physicians should be a single question. Not, did you like your food? Did the doc give you your opiates? Were you seen in a timely fashion? All that other jazz for patient safety. The ER doctor said, the press Ganie for me should be the following. Did you die? I think it's true in an emergency room, right? Their job is to keep people from dying. Did you die? No. Then the ER did their job. So the primary endpoint of this medication study was survival enhanced. Did you die? No. Secondly, were you discharged? Did you survive and were you discharged from the hospital? Versus stopping the medication due to adverse events. The secondary study is all-cause mortality, right? Did it prevent heart attacks? Did it prevent strokes? And the World Health Organization 11-point severity scale of disease. They are still recruiting. Their last update was just last week. So the last update on the Clinicaltrialsgov website was just last week. And they said, we're open and recruiting. We're open and recruiting. And we need to remember that these studies are still open. And this will drive me nuts about incentives with the press and publicists. Okay, you've got a medication. The medication works. The studies are done. The evidence is there. Then go hire yourself a PR agent. No, let me rephrase that. You can hire yourself a PR agent earlier, but keep them shut up. Can you keep them quiet? Can you keep them quiet until you have the data? Can we just do that? Can we do that for society? Like, God, it drives me nuts. You don't even have a medication on board yet, and you're pushing Dr. Oz to hawk it? It's insane. Anyways, hospitalized patients, still recruiting. Non-hospitalized patients. Will this medication be the Tamiflu or Zofluza? Which, by the way, work, but only if you do them early, like super early in the disease. And how do you have to know it's super early? You test. You got to test. With COVID testing down, these medications will be worthless without testing, without medical care. It's my 2 cents. Anyways, so this is a trial for non-hospitalized patients. They've recruited 1,450 so far. Last update was last week. Primary endpoint. Did you go to the hospital? Or did you die? Those are primary endpoints. Secondary endpoints are time to symptom progression. You remember that chart that I showed you from all the way in the very beginning? Let's see, I'll zip right through it for you. Right here. You remember that chart? Symptom progression. Symptom onset to progression. Did you prevent progression to day 20, death? Day 17, secondary infection. Day 16, acute cardiac injury. I'm here to tell you right now, this chart is not for everyone. I've seen people with heart damage on day 6. I've seen people with heart damage on day 6. I've seen people admitted to the hospital on day 4. I've seen people admitted to the hospital on day 16. This chart it's not that simple, guys. It's not that simple. All right, where were we? Yeah, shot on goal, non-hospitalized patients. Time to symptom progression versus resolution. Time to symptom progression versus resolution. They're still recruiting for this trial. If you want to get your publicist out there, here's what they should be doing. They should be recruiting for the trial, not having Dr. Oz talk about how it's frickin' Tamiflu. We don't know if it's Tamiflu. We have no clue that it's going to be Tamiflu. We got to wait for the data. Next, we are looking at the The third study is for viral clearance, of hospitalized patients, right? The trial for this vaccine was viral clearance in this study. We need a negative PCR by day 5. But guess what? To cook the books for their study, lies, damn lies, and statistics, they excluded the most severe cases. Well, those are the patients we know that their viral clearance can last up to day 21. They can shed virus. Day 21. There was one study on an immunosuppressed patient that was shedding virus on day like 100. So of course, severe cases, oxygen need, and immunosuppression were all excluded from this study, which is still recruiting. You know, I just want to, as a little non sequitur here, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we need outpatient treatments for this disease more than anyone can imagine. We need outpatient treatments so significantly for this disease. One of the cases in point here is long COVID and long COVID kids, which is real. You can go back to my long COVID live stream. You can go back to my long COVID live stream showing where now presidents and former CDC directors were both saying, don't worry kids, you're just fine. Well, the kids aren't just fine. Outpatient treatment would be essential for children, yet it's not being studied. Molnupiravir for kids, forget it, it's not being studied. We're going to try adults first. Mild infections were the main cause of long COVID kids. That's outpatient treatment. Can we use outpatient treatment to prevent long COVID? That's what I want to know. We're not going to be able to prevent all infections, but can we prevent the bad sequelae? The bad sequelae, sure, hospitalizations and death, but the worst sequelae is disability. Morbidity is what we call it. The MMWR that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, track, morbidity and mortality. Morbidity is disability. Morbidity is long COVID. And long COVID kids is the most tragic morbidity that we have. Most of these kids only had mild infections. Only 7% were admitted to the hospital. 7%. Previously, 70% of these patients, they didn't have medical conditions. They were healthy kids. So these symptoms here, I'm going to remind everyone of the symptoms. GI issues, chest pain, headache, fatigues, joint pains, sore throat, dizziness, rashes, moodiness, anxiety, depression, nausea. These were the top 10 symptoms of long COVID kids. Overall, these symptoms can be mistaken for any disease, which is why we need to test. Serologic testing for T cells may help as well. Antibodies definitely will help, but we need to learn more. Just because you don't have a positive PCR does not mean you didn't have COVID. Just because you had a negative antibody response doesn't mean you didn't have COVID. And so again, I go back to all of these studies and all of this press and all of this hullabaloo. We don't know what we don't know. And to put Dr. Oz talking about a medication that could be Tamiflu on there, that's crazy town. It's crazy town. So here we are. We've got a medication with imperfect data which hasn't been released yet. Will you use it? Doc, are you going to use Molnupiravir? Yeah, that's another thing I love. Our armchair scientists and armchair physicians and armchair nurses that have evolved out of this pandemic. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I never thought anyone would be able to say the name Molnupiravir. They did. Bamlanivimab. There you go. Bam, bam. I'm so happy that the United States has managed to develop scientific repertoire. It's very good. One of the most important things that all of us in society should learn to do is to be able to calculate risks and benefits. When I look at a nucleoside analog, I say the following thing. Man, You better have a serious disease if you're using a nucleoside analog, because it has potential for causing cancer. And in fact, I don't know if anyone remembers the BARDA whistleblower when President Trump was in office. The BARDA whistleblower was whistleblowing on this medication. The BARDA whistleblower said this medication could cause cancer. This medication will definitely cause teratogens, meaning you can't use it in pregnant women, and people are trying to push it forward rapidly. They were whistleblowing on this medication because there's huge risks. So don't put some talking head on TV telling me how great Molnupiravir is going to be. We don't know how great it's going to be. We need the data. The risk is potential mutagens, potential cancers, and teratogens, meaning children can be born with birth defects because their genes are messed up. Why are their genes messed up? The nucleoside analog. What's the benefit of a nucleoside analog? Well, in this case with Molnupiravir, the benefit is we don't see viral resistance using this type of medication with HIV. We haven't seen it. We don't know whether this virus will develop resistance or not, but we know other RNA viruses like HIV have not demonstrated resistance to this. What's another risk of this medication? Well, there's some concern about mitochondrial toxicity. And I'll tell you right now, I have a whole cadre of patients I've treated for over a decade. I wouldn't use the term that I'm a mitochondrial specialist. I have specialized knowledge in the mitochondria as I treat patients who have mitochondrial diseases all the time. It's part of our practice. Medications that cause mitochondrial toxicity don't just affect patients who have mitochondrial disease. They affect all of us. Our mitochondria are our energy powerhouses in each of our cells. And to give ourselves a medication that could cause brownouts in our body is not a good thing. Further, will this medication prevent long COVID? Well, I don't know, but I wouldn't use it more than a couple of days. The course is 5 days, twice a day. Longer than that, it's going to cause mitochondrial toxicity. And so I have real concerns about that. I actually have real concerns about it making long COVID worse, predisposing people to long COVID. That would be the real concern here. The benefit, it's like Tamiflu. Twice a day, 5 days, and you're done. That's why people are calling it Tamiflu, because its dosing is twice a day for 5 days if you're infected. Which then leads to the next question, can you use it for prophylaxis? That's not being studied. So anyone who's going to say, take Molnupiravir for prophylaxis, they're out of their goddamn minds if you think you're welcome. You're welcome. Right, so I had to sing a little bit. So questions remain. I think the biggest question about this is, will it prevent long COVID? My answer is not likely. The second biggest question is, will this work as a prophylaxis? We know right now we've got data on ivermectin as a prophylaxis. I don't think we have any data on the IV infusions for prophylaxis. We have to remember here, risk-benefit analysis. And when traveling through light speed, it's risky. It's some risky business. When you're playing around with nucleoside analogs, you're playing around with the nucleic acids in our body, it's a risky business. It's risky business. So we have to calculate risks and benefits with everything that we do. Have to calculate it. As a good example of that, the J&J vaccine, I don't know if you guys saw the data where a couple of sites were closed down. They were closed down because people had vasovagal syndrome. They got nauseous, dizzy, and lightheaded. And if someone had half a brain, they'd check their vital signs and find out that their heart rate was really slow. They vagaled down and passed out. That happens with blood draw probably every other day in the office. It's a very common known effect. Risks and benefits, everyone. If I could teach any of you anything in this world, it's doing a good risk-benefit analysis. Risk-benefit analysis. How will this Krispy Kreme donut benefit me? It'll spike my dopamine in my brain. What's the risk? It'll also spike the insulin in my body, which is an anabolic hormone. Could give me cancer. Could trip a couple of cancer cells over to cancer. The moral of the story is we have to calculate risk benefits in all that we do, and the press is not helping us calculate that, especially talking heads like myself. Ta-da! In conclusions, medicines will be essential. They'll be the keys to reopening society. They're going to be the key here. Molnupiravir may be useful, but I don't have the data on it yet. I don't have the data on it yet at all. Oh, what happened here? I went back to this. I went back to the data on this. Sorry, guys. Holy cow, someone is desperately trying to get a hold of me when I'm trying to broadcast. So here we are. Medicines are the key to opening. End of story. Once we tame the ravages of this disease, we can begin to turn to normal. We can begin to return to normal. Merck's drug is not a wonder drug. It's not a wonder drug. We don't know that right now. Nor is it magic. We don't even know anything other than the animal data. Did it work in ferrets? Sure, right? In mink, right? It worked in them? Fine. Okay. Mink are not human. And a very wise geneticist, Peggy McGovern, told me one day, Stephen, these bench scientists, they get so excited, but mice are not men. She's absolutely right. The medication Molnupiravir can't be used if you're pregnant, where we have bad outcomes in COVID. Molnupiravir can't be used if you're going to try and get pregnant. You have bad outcomes. The only way we get out of this is proper airborne and building safety, vaccines plus meds. That's it. Vaccines plus meds. They're going to lead us out of this. They're going to lead us out of this. So, quickly, to answer the request from a couple of our listeners, they wanted to know how best to protect their air. And the first thing I said is to get a PCO2 monitor. Get a monitor of the carbon dioxide, the parts per million in a room. They said, what should we look for? I said, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you what you need to look for. Here's what you need to look for. First off, you need to recognize that the buildings have airborne transmission. SARS-CoV-2 is airborne transmitted. So we have to safely open up. The way that we do that is wear air quality monitoring. Like I said before, we want to keep it 700 parts per million or under, 700 parts per million or under, and we want to keep the air as humid as we can. So here's your chart. At 250 to 400, that's outdoor air. Could we have outdoor air inside? And remember what I said, we need to treat our air like we treat our water. Unfortunately, in Flint, they didn't have good politicians and good business people treating their water properly. And in fact, I would argue it's probably the same people that are in charge of a lot of buildings. We need to treat our building air just like our building water. 250 to 400 parts per million, that's background, that's air, that's good, that's safe. 400 to 1,000, these are what we see indoor air with good air exchange. Unfortunately, when you get to the top end of it, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, we start to see people complain of drowsiness. If you're at 1,000 to 2,000, your risk of COVID in a building, in a space with someone who's, I don't care, 15 meters away from you, 20 meters away from you, not 3 feet, CDC, not 3 feet, Department of Education, 15 meters, 20 meters away from you. If you've got a 2,000 parts per million of PCO2, you might as well be in the same room as them. You might as well be in their hospital bed caring for them. You have a huge risk. So 1,000 to 2,000, we see drowsiness. That's really poor air. You've got to get out of a building space if you've got a PCO2 around 2,000. Got to get out of that space, especially if you can't control the safety of the people in that space. You got to get out. Once you get above 2,000, that's when we see real issues. Heart rate, nausea, loss of attention, poor concentration, sleepiness. This is bad, bad air. This is bad air. Now, unfortunately, the EPA has a workplace exposure limit. That's 5,000 parts per million. That has to completely change. That has to completely change. We need the EPA to really act on this. ASHRAE has said already that COVID is an airborne disease. I'll tell you it's an airborne disease. So we have to monitor our air, just like we monitor our water. 5,000 parts per million, that's an emergency situation. You're never gonna see me in a building. If I pop a 5,000, beep, turn around, get out the door, don't go anywhere there. Now, obviously, once you get to 40,000 ppms of PCO2, that's brain damage. No one should be anywhere near there. No one should be around 5,000. No one should be around 2,000. 700 to 1,000. Once you get over 1,000, your risk of getting infected, that's sky high. All right, let's see here. Okay, so I've been rambling on, and literally I've been on for almost an hour. Almost an hour now. On Murphy's Medical Minute. It's under 60 minutes. So today, in brief, wrapping up. Molnupiravir is not magic. And right now, it isn't even a medication. The press pushing it are pure madness. Pure madness. I remain hopeful, but remember, only the safety, the 2A study was just closed in February. Only the safety study. Efficacy remains to be determined. We need to do the best things we can to prevent COVID in our bodies because our bodies are made to be well. That's getting sun, that's exercising, that's hydrating, that's eating right, and do what you can right now to lose weight. Shed the COVID weight. We have to do it. There's no other way around it because the obese patient is at huge risk of death from COVID-19. Our bodies are made to be well. Treat them well. Eat right. And remember, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Don't believe next to anything you hear on the news, and remember that most of it is pushed by PR agents. That's right. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. I want to thank Mark Twain today. I want to thank Mark Hamill today, and I want to thank Marcus Aurelius today. I got my 3 marks in today. I want to remind all of you that you really need to do a risk-benefit analysis on just about everything you do, because that's the safest way to live. Safest way to live. Be well, take care of yourselves, be good to each other, do your best. This is Dr. Murphy Medical Associates and our team at coronatestct.com, bringing our mobile testing vans to Yankee Stadium, bringing our mobile testing vans to Madison Square Garden, all over New York City, where if you need an antigen test for an entry, you can get it done by a board-certified, COLA-certified CLIA laboratory. That's what we're here for. Open up safely, monitor the air. Building owners, take notice. Make your buildings well, because our bodies are made to be well. Guys, I love you. Today's date is April 9th, 2021. It's Dr. Murphy Medical Associates. You just watched Murphy's Medical Minute. With